You know, when you think about ancient pharaohs or European royalty, or even some of the world's biggest financiers, what comes to mind? Probably wealth, power, dynasties, right? But what if I told you they all shared a common strategy, one that sounds pretty shocking to most of us today? They married their cousins. A lot. And this wasn't just some strange ancient custom. It was a calculated move that lasted for millennia. And the reasons why? Well, they go way deeper than you might think. And look, this isn't just something from the history books. Maybe you've even met someone, and you find out their parents are first cousins. For them, it's just normal. It's how their family stays close. But for most of us, hearing that kind of stops you in your tracks, right? It immediately sparks this huge question in your head that ties together genetics, money, and power. And that right there, that's the central mystery we're going to unpack today. Because on the one hand, we all have this gut feeling. We know there are potential genetic risks. But on the other hand, you've got the most powerful, most successful families in human history. We're talking pharaohs, royals, financiers, all of them choosing this as their go-to strategy. So what gives? What do they know that we've forgotten? What was the real logic behind this high-stakes genetic gamble? Okay, so to really get to the bottom of the why, we've got to start with the science. We need to understand what's actually happening at a genetic level when close relatives have children. And here's the key thing to remember. It's not really about creating anything new. It's all about amplifying what's already there. All right, there's a big sciencey word for this: homozygosity. Yeah, I know, it's a mouthful. But don't worry about the term. Just think of it as a gene amplifier. Here's the deal. First cousins share grandparents, right? So they share a pretty big chunk of the same DNA. That means when they have a child, there's a much higher chance that the kid will get the exact same gene from both mom and dad. It's like the genetic volume gets turned way, way up on that specific trait. And this is where it becomes a massive gamble. It's a total double-edged sword. If those amplified genes happen to be for, say, incredible intelligence or amazing artistic talent, you might just get a genius. I mean, we're talking about people like Charles Darwin or even Albert Einstein. Yep, both of them married their first cousins. But, and this is a huge but, if the genes are amplifying are those sneaky, hidden, defective ones, the result can be absolutely devastating genetic disorders. See? The process doesn't create new outcomes. It just takes what's already there and pushes it to the absolute extremes. So you're probably wondering, how big is the risk, really? Well, for the children of first cousins, the added risk of being born with a serious congenital defect is about 2 to 3% higher than for the general population. Now, that might not sound like a huge number, but it's not nothing either. It's a real, statistically significant roll of the dice, and yet it was clearly a risk these families were more than willing to take. Which brings us right back to our main question. If there's a known genetic risk, no matter how small, why on earth was this the preferred strategy for the most powerful families in history? The answer, as it turns out, has less to do with biology and a whole lot more to do with their balance sheet. Let's be real. For these ancient elites, marriage was rarely about love. Forget finding your soulmate. It was a tool, a strategic transaction designed for one primary purpose: to create a sealed vault for the family's resources. The entire point was to make sure that the power, the land, and the money never, ever left the bloodline. So how did this vault actually work? Well, it was brilliant in a way. First off, wealth preservation. Think about it. If a daughter marries her cousin, her dowry and her inheritance just stay within the extended family. It doesn't get siphoned off to some other clan. Second, power consolidation. Suddenly, your uncle is also your father-in-law. Imagine how tight-knit and loyal that alliance is. And finally, and this is crucial, it just made everything easier. Trust is built in. When you're dealing with your own flesh and blood, the whole family structure is way more stable, with a lot less friction. But we know this was a gamble. So what happened when the dice landed badly? What did these powerful families do when a child was born with a visible defect, threatening the family's entire image of genetic superiority? They couldn't afford for those outcomes to tarnish the family brand or drain its resources. So, over centuries, they developed this really sophisticated and often pretty cruel playbook for managing these unpredictable results. It was a system designed to protect the collective, often at the direct expense of the individual. And what's remarkable is just how systematic this was. The first and most brutal option was invisibilization. The child was just hidden away, erased from public life. A more socially acceptable choice was honorable exile. You'd send a child to a monastery or convent and frame it as a pious sacrifice to God, which, very conveniently, also legally removed them from the line of inheritance.
And then there was the ultimate PR move, sanctification. The family would reframe the defect as a blessing, calling the child a holy one, turning a potential shame into a public display of piety. Now, it's really tempting to look at all of this as just ancient history, but that deep-seated logic of protecting the bloodline and ensuring the fitness of your heirs is far from dead. It's simply evolved. Yeah, the methods have changed, but the underlying impulse, it's exactly the same. We no longer use cousin marriage as the primary filter, but we absolutely still use powerful social filters to protect resources, consolidate power, and ensure the continuity of our own in-groups.
Just look at the comparison. The old filter was literal in marriage to preserve pure blood. The new filter is way more subtle. Instead of marrying cousins, modern corporate elites might hire exclusively from a few top universities, seeking a kind of, well, quasi-genetic similarity in thought and background. That obsession with culture fit? That's the new purity trust. And hoarding resources now takes the form of internal promotions and a retainer culture that keeps power locked within a trusted circle. And you see this modern screening everywhere. The whole idea of matching doors, marrying someone from a similar socioeconomic and educational background, that's just the modern version of making sure resources don't leave the clan. And that intense anxiety that modern parents have about their kids' performance, that's a direct echo of the ancient fear of producing an heir who couldn't carry the family forward. And in a fascinating blend of old and new, places like Saudi Arabia, where cousin marriage is still common, now mandate premarital genetic testing, using modern science to manage the risks of an ancient practice. And so this is the thought I want to leave you with. We tell ourselves we're more enlightened now, that we've moved past these primitive ideas of blood purity. But when we filter our social circles, our workplaces, and our partners based on university degrees, social class, and performance, has the game truly changed? Or have we just found a more modern, more socially acceptable way to play the same ancient game of protecting the tribe?